Welcome to A Tale of Two Scribes. I'm your host, Eric P. Bishop. This is a podcast where interesting people come and tell about the stories they've crafted. As for myself, I'm an author. I've created novels, short stories, novellas, and even poetry. If you'd like to find out more about what I've done, please go to my website, ericpbishop.com. Thanks, and enjoy the journey. Welcome to another episode of A Tale of Two Scribes. Tonight, I am pleased to have Andrew Nelson on the program. Hi, Andrew.
How you doing, Eric?
I'm doing great. Well, thanks for coming on. Um, I did want to start this podcast apologizing in case we have any technical issues. This is my first one I've tried to film, first full podcast, ever since the hurricane came through Western North Carolina. So, unlike many of the people around me who have horrific damage and all the other stuff, I was fortunate I did not. Um, the storm did decide to take away my internet, so we are on a hotspot for an iPhone. So we'll see how it goes. Um, let's talk about your background. I love to dive into what got people into writing. So when did that bug first get you that made you think I need to write a novel?
Well, it's a good question. I never thought I was going to. It was a very strange route to writing. I had always been a voracious reader growing up.
Mm.
Grew up with Joe Wambaugh and eventually graduated to Frank Herbert and Tom Clancy. And so my foray into writing actually started out as a dare. Excuse me, my wife and I were talking one night, and because she also does a lot of reading, and she said that she thought that writing a book would be hard. But I had spent, I mean, when you're a cop, all you basically do is write reports. And
Right.
I had also been a detective and a sergeant doing investigations. And after a while, I mean, you deal with so much stuff that you say something stupid to your wife, like, no, I think it would be easy. And she dared me. So I wrote a couple of chapters, some
Mhm.
brief stuff, and she was like, wow, this is really good. But she's my wife, so I kind of figured, okay, she's got to say that. But then 9/11 happened,
Yeah.
and our whole world got turned upside down. And so all of that writing just kind of went to the wayside. And so we dealt with 9/11. Eventually, I retired back in 2005. And so we moved out to central Illinois and kind of like, going through the whole retirement thing and whatnot. And then I went to work for a sheriff's office for 2 years.
Okay.
And I left that because I realized I ruined a perfectly good retirement. And I was bored. And she said, well, why don't you finish your book?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what book? And she said, the book you started writing me. And I'm like, I thought she had forgotten about that. So I was like, I don't know. I don't remember any of it. She says, well, I do. And
Mm.
she grabbed up whatever the notes that she had from when I first wrote it out,
Mhm.
and she handed it to me. And I looked at it and kind of thought, all right, I'll give it a try.
Mhm.
And so I sat down, and it took me about a year to finish the first book, which is Perfect Porn.
Mhm.
And I had just written the book for her, and I gave it to her almost like a little present and said, "Here
Mhm.
you go. There's your book." And she read it, and she was like, "This is really good." And that's where it basically started from. She was like, "We got to publish this." And
Wow.
so then, jump from writing to how do you publish a book? And
Hmm.
so we took that on, and that was the first book came out in 2013.
Okay.
Actually, so 11 years ago,
Wow.
this month, and I've had 15 books since then.
Unbelievable. Yeah, the jump for most people when they get to that point of I've got a finished novel, now what do I do with it or how do I publish it? Sometimes think that's actually where the work begins. And not to say writing a novel is
It
easy
is.
because it's not at all, but especially if you enjoy the concept of writing and you're pretty good at it quickly, trying to publish it if you go your own way, or even dealing with agents and publishers and all that, completely different world, completely different.
Oh yeah, when you make that jump, when once you put the end, it actually just should say the beginning, because you
Exactly.
go into a whole different realm with it. And we eventually made the decision after looking at all of the options of going with the self-publishing route,
Mhm.
because like I told her, I said, I wrote this book for you. So let's just put it out there, and if people enjoy it, then that's the way it's supposed to be. But the whole thing about trying to go through and find an agent and then a publishing house, and that really is where the work is.
Yeah. Well, it's a daunting task, and then you're taking something that you've put so much work into and you're basically handing it off to someone, with the anticipation that A, they're going to like it. And for in regards of an agent, that an agent's then willing to sign you. Okay, that's step one. Most of the time, the agent is then going to be like, pretty good, but I bet we can make some changes here. And doesn't always happen,
True.
but that can happen. So that becomes a process. Then when they're happy that they think they have a product that they can submit and go on sub to a publisher likes it, they're going to make changes to it. So that process is, and I know so many people that have been through it. It's so long and so arduous. And for many people it's worth doing, but you have to remember, you don't finish a book, hand it off to someone and say, that'll come out real soon. No, it won't.
No, no, it won't.
No, no, it won't. And even
And
if you go
I
your own
mean,
way,
I love the writing process.
yeah.
I really do. I love being able to get into that world.
Hmm.
And so for me, it was a natural step to say, okay, here's the book. I'm not going to mess around with the whole, the industry, the legacy media. I'm just going to put it out there. People enjoy it, so be it. But to me, the writing is what I enjoy the most out of. So I try to make the all the other aspects of it as painless as possible.
As painless as possible. Yeah. No, that's the right approach to it. And I've said this on the podcast before, and I've said it a lot to authors I've interacted with, is nobody is good at everything, no matter what somebody thinks. They might have a big ego, but guess what? You're still not good at everything. So if you're a good writer, it's it's limited opportunity for you to also be a great editor, a great cover designer, great marketer, all the other steps that have to happen if you go indie. Um, so it's always good to stay in your lane, do things that you're really good at. And if you have the ability to financially, outsource what you can. Also for people that this is their side gig, they're not retired, or they don't, have the opportunity to just write full time. There's not enough hours in the day to write books, try to market books, try to design covers and all the other steps, unless you want, to put a book out once every 5 years.
Right. And we won't talk about the M word, because marketing is probably, yeah, no, I'm just going to stop at this point because nothing good is going to come out of my mouth. That is a huge hurdle, I think, for a
Yeah.
lot of authors,
Yes.
and even within the legacy media, because in this day and age, where it used to be, you would like, basically submit your book into the publisher and they would run with it.
Mhm.
A lot of them are just, okay, and now go out and market it.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these authors, even though they do have a contract, are having to deal with it. And it's daunting because you're basically, it sometimes it feels like you're screaming into the void,
Hmm.
because there are so many authors out there.
Right.
And you're trying to capture that, like that very brief moment where you can interact with a potential reader, whether it's on, Instagram or Twitter or
Hmm.
TikTok, and people are scrolling through, and it is very hard. It really is.
It is absolutely. But there's enough people out there that are successful doing it that I try to also tell people, look, it's possible. You can hinder yourself by things you do or don't do, but you do have to have the faith that, guess what, if you do scream from the top of the hills, there's possibility that people will hear you screaming, even if it's just help. If you're screaming help, they're going to hear you.
Yeah,
um
true.
They might not hear buy my book, which is what you're actually screaming, but oh yeah.
Yeah, it's and you do you connect. There are times where you'll get that feedback on one of the social media things.
Mm,
So and that's always good. It's always nice to hear from somebody that picked up a copy of the book and said, "Hey, just want to let you know I read it," and and that at the end of the day, that really is one of the gratifying things when you connect with that reader.
hmm No, I completely agree. But it's exciting though to talk to people that have gone down that path, especially doing it yourself, because there's definitely good reasons to go traditional, but those reasons are less there's less of them as than there was 20, 25 years ago, especially really
Right.
with the advent of Kindle. Once Amazon kind of took over the market to some degree and created ebooks, and then the ebooks, I mean, I was even hesitant to get an ebook reader when my first novel came out in 2021, because I didn't read ebooks and I was like, I don't want to get an ebook. Then I saw what the sales were for ebooks, and I said, okay, that's actually where a lot of revenue is generated.
Yeah, yeah. The ebook sales, I would venture to say, are probably three-quarters of my monthly sales.
Yeah.
And I'm a traditional book guy. I love to hold a book in my hand.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of people, and plus you can hold a tremendous amount of books in them. So
Exactly.
there's definitely a gain for it.
Yeah. So let's talk about your background. Let's talk about um, what your time was like with the police force, because you had several different roles, and how do you think, how did that shape you into being the writer that you've become, and how many anecdotes show up in your books, and how did all that play out?
Um, Well, it's interesting because obviously they're going to any life experience that you bring is going to eventually materialize onto the pages.
Hmm.
So in my books, I draw on people that I worked with, maybe some scenarios that I kind of played a little bit loose with, sometimes to protect the innocent. Um, you watch, I mean, you whether it's NYPD Blue or Blue Bloods or anything like that, as a cop, and you're watching those shows, and my wife won't watch those shows with me because it's like, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And you pick it apart. But
Heavy editorial
I
going
wanted
on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring the reader into a genuine NYPD world
Hmm.
and let them experience it through the eyes of somebody that had done it for 20 years.
Hmm.
And I'd worked in patrol, I had worked in investigations, I was a supervisor. But one of the key elements goes back to my time when I worked for the intelligence division,
Hmm.
and I had done protection for world leaders.
Yeah.
This was back in the 90s, so it was President Clinton, John Paul II. Um, and so my main character, James McGuire, is a former Intel guy,
Okay.
and his best friend is a Secret Service agent.
Hmm.
And so that kind of plays into a lot of the roles that I had
Hmm.
when I was in the intelligence division. And so I drew on that as I was
Yeah.
crafting these two characters. And that banter that goes along with it, that, is between the two.
Hmm.
And like I said, I wanted to give people like an inside look, um, inside the bubble of protection so that they could see what actually goes on in there.
Okay.
And so those key elements have played a role throughout the series.
So let's talk about that for a second. So, what got you into that role to do the protective detail? What were you doing before that? And then how did that transition take place into much more of a specialized field within the New York Police Department?
Well, I was doing investigations. I was a detective,
Okay, you were a
and I
detective.
actually had a lieutenant that had been on the previous mayor's protection detail.
Okay.
And we were talking one day, and I said, I'm pretty much, burnt out doing this. And he
Hmm.
said, well, let me make a phone call. And next thing you know, I was in the intelligence division. So it does pay, people that you know. And I actually ended up working for a captain there who
Hmm.
I guess saw potential in me. And next thing you know, he was giving me assignments that were leading to ever increasing responsibility
Okay.
in doing dignitary protection.
Okay.
And it was the best. I, you know, it's funny because I look back on that 20 years and I
Hmm.
did so many different things during that period of time. And I loved all of it.
Hmm.
I really did. I just enjoyed all the different aspects of it, whether it was patrol, whether it was doing investigations or protection. But at a point that, okay, I'm done with this. I've kind of peaked and
Hmm.
I need to change. But I went to the intelligence division, and that was the best time in my career because it's very interesting, because you're working with Secret Service, you're working with State Department, you're working with Capitol Police, and you're seeing things from within the fishbowl,
Hmm.
you know, because you're doing close protection and you're seeing everything on that outward uh, perspective.
Yeah.
But to stand next to these people, and you become a fly on the wall. You
Hmm.
really do. People, I mean, you're just part of the background,
Right.
and you're privy to a lot of different things that go on
Hmm.
that most people would either be thrilled or horrified, depending on your worldview.
Right.
Um, but you see them from a different perspective,
Yeah.
and it's very interesting.
Yeah, no, totally. I wanted to circle back to one thing you said because I was literally having a conversation. My son's 17, really got big into music the last couple years, and this year especially, he's moved over to like bluegrass. He's loving bluegrass, and he's starting to make a lot of contacts in the industry. He's being taught by one of the top guitar. It just happened to work out. He's getting lessons by one of the top bluegrass guitarists in the country, and so we're talking about it today, and he's like, "Yeah, Dad, it's not always what you know, it's who you know." And I was like, "Dude, I've been telling you that for years. If you build a Rolodex, I had to tell him what a Rolodex was years ago. If you build a
Oh
Rolodex,
God, yeah,
that's what
yeah,
can get you propelled in whatever your industry is." And the people that there's definitely intelligent, very smart people that rise to the top. Absolutely. However, at the same time, there's a lot of people that rise to the top that they know the person closer to the top that brought them or that gave them that or gave them an opportunity, whatever it might be. It's knowing those people. If you don't
yeah,
know anybody,
absolutely,
your opportunities are really limited. If you know a lot of people, that's going to open up more doors for you.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and the other thing too that you said at the end is I've been around a few fairly well-known people in a couple different industries, and yeah, what people think goes on, and some of them are very dull and boring, but and I think also too that people always glamorize, whether it's we'll use Bill Clinton as an example. If you're a president or the most well-known person in any kind of a role, so many people know who they are. So I think your mind kind of creates like, what are they really like or all that. And it's probably not as glamorous as your imagination might think it is.
Well, president's a little bit different,
True,
but
that's true.
it's yeah. What I always thought was very funny was when we would be on a presidential detail, and obviously, I mean, Bill Clinton really drew a lot of people to him. He was very, very personable.
Hmm.
Whatever your feelings are on the politics, he was an amazing person in terms of he really connected with people,
Right.
and I saw that firsthand.
Hmm.
But what was very interesting is you would see other people from other walks of life, whether they were in the financial
Hmm.
industry, whether they were celebrities, actors, actresses,
Right.
musicians. And once they got around the president of the United States, they became like every other person. and you're sitting there, you're watching this, and they're celebrities in their own fields,
Correct.
but coming into contact with the president kind of just marginalizes all that.
Yeah.
They would walk away with the biggest smiles and everything, and I'm like, okay.
I think I've told the story on the podcast on one of the other earlier episodes, but I was 17 years old and I was in Palm Springs, California at the and I was visiting my grandmother out there. I had an aunt and uncle that went out and they holidayed in Palm Springs every year for the winter. They left Connecticut, get away from all, the snowbirds, get away from the cold of
Right.
Connecticut. They didn't go to Florida, they went to California. So we're at the Bob Hope Invitational and my uncle goes, "Hey, you want to meet President Ford?" Former President Ford is like, yeah, 17 years old. I'm a history buff. So walk up to the tee box. Well, come to find out, and I found this out after the fact, he actually knew President Ford. They used to golf together, I guess, on occasion, or whatever it was, whatever the connection was. It was something dealing with golf. So he walks up, and there's President Ford. There's two Secret Service agents right near him. Slaps him right on the kind of the back upper shoulder. Hey, Jerry, how's it going? And I'm like, waiting like for the barrage of like attacks. So the Secret Service agents kind of look over at him, and President Ford says, "Hey, Elmer, how are you?" They know each other, and I'm just like waiting for like this scene, and I'm just like, okay, this isn't how I thought it would play out. Seeing my first president,
Right.
but it was a cool
Well, it's
experience.
funny because we were doing the Jackie Robinson memorial at Shea Stadium,
Okay.
uh, and Clinton was coming to it.
Mhm.
So that was my site. And I'm walking through, and I'll never forget as I'm going through the tunnels, making sure all my post standers are where they need to be. A couple of baseball players. I mean, they're baseball players. I mean, I grew up as a baseball fan. So
Right.
to me, these are the guys.
These are the rock stars.
And yeah, and they start talking and they're asking questions. And they were like little kids. The
Mhm.
president's really going to be here. And so I'm talking to him, and it reinforced that whole thing that, no matter how big you are, when the president shows up, all bets are off. Everybody
Yeah.
kind of goes back to their, foundation of like, they're seeking out that celebrity, that ultimate celebrity in the United States.
Yep. Well, I write several. One of my series in particular follows the Secret Service and very close ties into the president. And I've researched a lot of stuff. I know Secret Service agents, and I was talking to someone just this weekend about it. And I said, part of the reason it's such a big deal is you're talking about a position that only 40, and I couldn't remember this weekend, and it hasn't. You might know off the top of your head someone served two non-consecutive terms. We've only had 45 actual presidents, even though Biden's
Right.
46. And for the life of me, it's not. I could look it up on Google in 5 seconds and cheat, but for the life of me, I can't remember who was it that was got it twice. I think I even said McKinley. I'm like, no, McKinley got killed, and I was kind of like trying to think back. I know it was a while ago. But the
Yeah.
takeaway was it was the fact of we've had hundreds. I mean, I don't know, 400 or 500 million people have lived in our country in the course of our history. We've only had 45 people reach that pinnacle of the highest position there is. So
Right.
it's one of those clubs that very limited membership, basically.
It's exclusive.
Very
Yeah.
exclusive. And so people
Yeah.
obviously, because of that part of that lure of like, oh my goodness, they they grab onto that power and just to be able to know that you're going to be somewhere close by where the president's going to be, the average person still gets excited about that. I would say most people
Yeah.
would get excited about that.
Oh, without a doubt. And then you have all the people that do the protection, and they're just tired at the end of the shift. It's like, I want to go home.
Will this guy stop shaking hands for a few minutes and shut up so I can go sleep in my bed tonight?
Well, that was one of the things that we had to contend with Clinton is he was never on time,
Yeah.
no matter where he went. It just he would end up talking to people, and it would just keep pushing the clock back. And
Right.
it got to the point where they had to actually adjust the time, tell him what time it was, but then build in a buffer so that they could have like a reasonable shot at getting him to the event at the right time.
Right. I read a lot of books about him, and I've known some people that know him as well, but they always described it as Clinton time. There's what time you're
Yes,
supposed to be there, and then there's Clinton time. So
yes.
versus the
Yeah, everything, yeah, everything was kind of like, etched in like, Jello with a popsicle stick. We're gonna kind of shoot for it, but we know it's not gonna happen.
oh geez. Versus the inverse would be then Bush. You get Bush that comes next, 43, and very well known for being
Right.
punctual. And if you're on time, you're late. He,
Very.
he almost had a military mindset versus Clinton had
Yes.
less of a military mindset. We'll just put it that way when it comes to timeliness.
Oh yeah. No, at one point I mean, we had the entire route shut down waiting for him at the airport. And it was like, yeah, he's not moving. And it's like, we have the whole city shut down. We
Right.
have to kind of push him along a little bit at this point. Yeah.
You're
But they're all
inconveniencing a lot of
different.
people,
Yeah.
Mr. President.
Yeah. And you do, you see a lot of, I mean, everybody's different. And that was the interesting thing about it. Because you see all of these different world leaders, at the time, it was Netanyahu during his first time. Then you had Arafat,
Hmm.
Ahmadinejad. And so you're dealing with all of these different, disparate personalities,
Yeah.
and you really got to see a whole spectrum, the good, the bad, and the ugly
Hmm.
with it. But that's why I said it was the best time, because you everything was new every time.
Right. Yeah, there's no staleness in that type of environment. And there can't be because if you're stale and if you're not taking it serious, then that's when bad things happen.
Yeah. And yeah, what we recently saw, unfortunately.
So, and I mean, it's crazy, and this isn't going to go politics direction, but literally in the
Right.
last couple months, we have. I mean, I'm 47, so I think when Reagan was shot, I was 5, I believe. I think it was 5 when Reagan got shot. 81. Yeah, I think it was 81. Reagan got shot. So long time since someone at that level has actually been, shot basically. So with
Right.
Trump, you have Trump get shot and then a second attempt made within a very short period of time, even though fortunately no shots from the shooter came, were taken. But massive news story, massive historical moment, really. That because we've and I've studied it a lot for reading. I've studied it a lot for what I write, and also just from a history standpoint. The Secret Service has changed so much over the years, and now the security apparatus for the president now is so massive. I mean, the budget is billions of dollars, and so when those lapses happen, they're so dramatic in that regard. Of it's a big deal when something fails that's so big.
Secret Service was under Treasury.
Right.
And so there would be events where they would need additional manpower.
Hmm.
So you'd have, like, say, for the UN General Assembly. So they would bring in other Treasury agents, whether it was ATF or Customs. And
Right.
so you knew, but they came in for those smaller, well, we considered them smaller, but
Hmm.
those smaller protection assignments. Um, but what you're finding, like even with the Secret Service now and most law enforcement agencies, that manpower is just down across the board.
Yeah.
And a lot of these departments are struggling. I mean, NYPD at our top, I think we were at 50,000 sworn officers in the
Hmm.
NYPD. I mean, that's bigger than some countries' standing armies.
Right.
Um, and so we really, I mean, we never had to struggle with manpower.
Hmm.
But even now, I think they're down into, I want to say, into the 30s.
Hmm.
And I mean, for New York City, with a population of 8 million,
Hmm.
you, that creates a strain, even though 30,000 is a huge number. Now you get to some of these other departments that have maybe 1,000, 1,200 people in it. They take a couple of hundred hit, and that hurts them. Well,
Yes.
same thing with Secret Service. I mean, they're suffering with the manpower too. So, and the problem is you bring in these other agencies to cover, and they don't have the same training,
Hmm.
and that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
It's one thing if you can put them as a post stander on the perimeter, but
Right.
if you're using them in the inner perimeter, you're asking for a problem.
Yeah. The Trump assassination, especially attempt that there was after once they got him off the stage and what took place to get him to the vehicle and out. There's so many images and memes and all the other stuff of the agents who weren't actually Secret Service agents, right there, and
Right.
it and I respect them so much. I've studied them so much, and then to see something like that occur, it just puts them in such a negative light for a lot of people that that's the it's hard to see basically for someone that really
It
admires
is.
their job because it's a anything with with law enforcement. You're talking about in many cases a thankless job. People are excited to see police officers or excited, happy to see them when it's bad, but when they're getting speeding tickets or there's other things going on, people are not happy. So it's not a job
No,
that's
not at all.
always getting lots of love. And so it's especially difficult when you see an agency really struggling because of resources and manpower to be able to, to basically do what they're sworn to do, which is to protect whoever it is, a former president, someone running for office, or the current president.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're willing,
It is very hard.
to, can you talk some about, I know you were a 9/11 first responder, and it's something that I was down in the Carolinas when it occurred. I was just out of college. But it was definitely one of those pivotal moments in my memories and something I'll always remember where I was. So, can you talk about your experience there and what it was like to be a responder?
Yeah. It was one of those things where, you're never prepared for something like
Hmm.
that. It was the election day in New York City,
Gotcha.
and I was a citywide election supervisor. So I'm going around to all these polling locations to make sure that, the officers are there and that there's no issues. And uh, the radio came over because we had the traffic radio on of
Mhm.
a plane that had hit the tower.
Hmm.
And I've talked to people about this, and they said, that must have been shocking. And I said, no, not really, because that area of Manhattan where the towers were was you had the Hudson River on one side and the East River on the other, and it was uncontrolled airspace.
Gotcha.
So you would have, planes and helicopters, sightseeing helicopters going up and down the
Hmm.
rivers. And you kind of figured, it was a little bit odd because it was so clear that day.
Hmm.
But maybe they had a problem. And at that point, didn't know what hit.
Right.
It was just that, a plane had struck. And it wasn't and so I just went on with my day.
Hmm.
Uh, Thought, yeah, this isn't going to be good. You know, so we had just finished up with one polling location, and I'd stopped to get coffee. So at that point, we knew it was different.
Hmm.
So we get in the car and we head over to our special operations division, and we get there our way through. But everybody in this stretch of Brooklyn on the Belt Parkway had a clear view into Manhattan.
Okay.
So you could see the World Trade Center and you could see the smoke billowing from it. And so everybody was basically had pulled over.
Hmm.
So traffic was all congested on the Belt Parkway. We eventually made it in. We couldn't, we got over the Brooklyn Bridge, and the pedestrian traffic was so bad
Hmm.
that you couldn't drive any further in. There was just
Okay.
too many people trying to get out.
Trying to get out.
So
Yeah.
we pulled over off that first exit, where our headquarters, One Police Plaza is, and eventually hooked up with one of my bosses. And so we were trying to figure out at that point what was going on. No
Hmm.
one knew.
Yeah.
And I tell people, you unfortunately, but to be completely honest, you saw the best of people and the absolute worst of people that day,
Right.
you know. And when you have something like as big as 9/11 happen, you kind of expect that you're going to run the whole gamut of emotions and the way people respond to it. Well,
Yeah.
at that point, then we wind up getting assigned to start evacuating people out of Lower Manhattan.
Okay.
And what came after that was kind of what bothered me the most, was because now we've done all these evacuations. We've moved the people along, we've
Hmm.
tended to those that were injured, and now we're kind of just like standing there.
Okay.
And it felt like, you know, there, and I don't know, I mean, you can't have a plan for something like this,
Right.
but it kind of was like, okay, the old, and I'm sure same thing in the military, you hurry up and wait.
Hmm.
And so you're just standing around waiting for something that unfortunately didn't come that night. Um, but it, we we ended up going down to ground zero later that evening.
Okay.
And as somebody who had spent so much time down there when I was in the intelligence division, because Secret Service at the time had been in six World Trade Center, and then they moved over to seven.
Right.
So I was down there for meetings all the time and
Hmm.
taking dignitaries up because everybody wanted to go up into the towers.
Yeah.
And so you get down to a place that you were intimately familiar with.
Hmm.
And I remember turning the corner and everything is kind of burning. Um, and the one thing that the TV images don't portray is just how high that pile was.
Right.
Everything had just been pulverized,
Hmm.
and it's something that just will never, it never leaves you.
Yeah.
You know, those images. It was, you know, a lot of heroes, a lot of heroes, and I think that's one of the things I don't think gets enough acknowledgement, because on 9/11 the NYPD lost 23 members of the department.
Hmm.
And since then, we have lost hundreds more
Hmm.
from illnesses
From illnesses. Yeah.
because, of course, the air was fine.
Right.
And anybody that spent 5 minutes down there could tell you that the air was not fine.
Yeah.
Um, Same thing with Port Authority, same thing with FDNY, construction workers. Everybody got sick. I
Hmm.
got sick. I lost my partner to cancer. Um, so it's one of those things that just it never leaves you. I've gotten to the point now. In the beginning, I kind of like, every anniversary I'd watch the news and whatnot, and I can't even watch it anymore. It's
Yeah.
just, I go back to that. I remember everything that went on that day and the days after, and it's, not
Yeah.
something that and I guess in a way, no different than people that went through Pearl Harbor. When you go through a national tragedy like that, it stays with you for the rest of your life.
Right. Yeah. No, it's I had a Jack Carr on the podcast several weeks back, and Jason Piccolo was going to co-host with the Protectors. We were going to do like a group, do a kind of a combination, and Jason ended up being overseas, so Gene O'Neill stepped in for Jason on the Protector side, and Gene, like yourself, who's a first responder, and he did develop cancer from it. He's currently in remission with it, but yeah, the stories they they never get easier to hear. I, and what I try to tell, like, as I tell my kids grew up all after that, that my son was,
Yeah.
was born long after 9/11, and my daughter even further. And so for them, it's just a story they've heard, pictures they've seen, video they've seen, but they don't have that connection that so many people have. And what I've tried to tell them over the years and instill is like, look at the bravery that took place that day. The horrific stuff is there, and that doesn't go away. What was done to us doesn't go away, but look at what people did for other people. Try to focus more now on the heroic side of things. And to see the hope in people. And we talked with internet connection, all that. Western North Carolina has gone through a pretty horrific event with the hurricane, and South Carolina did, and Georgia and Florida and Tennessee. So, 6 states, and I'm in Western North Carolina, so that's my connection to it. And towns that I was in 3 weeks ago, some of them don't exist anymore, and I haven't gone up to see them. It's not appropriate
Right.
to go up there right now with for safety reasons and all that. But um, these events, they stay with you and they scar you. But the positive, like this weekend, as we're filming this, um, I didn't have damage to my house. I didn't go through a lot of the horrible things that people 30 minutes away have gone through. So I volunteered all weekend, and it was just amazing to see the turnout of people helping other people. A Sunday afternoon, a lady came up towards the end of the afternoon. Just she was from Asheville, and we were filling her car, and she was looking for one other thing, and I got her this one other thing she really wanted. Oh, cat litter. That's what it was. It was cat litter. She said, "You have cat litter?" I said, "We have a pallet of cat litter." So I went and got her a big, huge tub of cat litter, and she goes, "Hey, my friend's in the car too. Can you get her one?" Absolutely. So I go get a second thing. And she gives me this big hug and she says, "Thank you." And I almost felt guilty getting the hug. It's like, no, I'm just here to help because what else can I do right now? But that humanity kicks in, and that gratefulness that people feel. And what I tried to tell people that day, I was like, man, this is what we need to remember, especially like during an election year where it seems like half the country wants to kill the other half of the country. Guess what? We're a lot
Right.
closer together than you think we are. And when events like this occur, it should remind you that guess what? We're really not that different.
No, and you're 100% right. I always said if we could just go back to 9/12,
Yeah.
because as bad as 9/11 was, when you look back and you look at how everybody started to come together on 9/12, and you
Right.
know you're down there. It's my job. I have to be down there.
Hmm.
But you see all of these people coming in, and whether they're from all different relief organizations and volunteers and whatnot. And it was like with the Salvation Army. I mean, they came in right away and they were one of the last ones out.
Hmm.
And when you're working all these crazy hours, and we did after that, and just even doing security around the area, um, and the Salvation Army became like that place that you could go and just be away from it for
Hmm.
a brief period of time. And then but all of these people came from somewhere else,
Right.
you know, and that's the American spirit. you
Yeah.
know, I mean, it's like we're not running. When something bad happens in this country, we're not running to another country.
Right.
We'll take care of it. We'll fix it,
Yeah.
you know, with or without help. And it's
Yeah.
usually people in the community or from the communities coming together because at the end of the day, we're all American
Hmm.
and we're going to take care of one another.
Amen. Amen. Absolutely. Um, I want to circle back to books real quick and see what you're working on. And before I circle back too far though, as I was kind of looking through your bibliography of books, I saw my favorite book in the list. It's got to be Bishop's Gate. So tell me about. I haven't read it. So what's Bishop's Gate about? It's got to be my favorite, of course.
Well, here's the thing. I started off, I was writing one book,
Right. For
for
your
my
wife.
wife, and I realized I liked it. And so I know where everything's going. Like
Right.
the inside mind, it all makes perfect sense. Um, but the trip from A to Z is going to be a little bit circuitous for some people.
Absolutely.
Bishopsgate tended to get a little bit more political
Uh-oh.
because it's actually introducing characters that are going to play pivotal roles later on down the line, and
Gotcha.
kind of giving you a little bit of insight
Okay.
into some of these characters, their motivations with it.
Okay.
Um, so but it's still still a NYPD centric book
Hmm.
that deals with um, spies
Okay.
and that kind of a world
I
in
like it.
there.
I
And
like
what
it.
starts off as a simple NYPD investigation, all of a sudden now has its tentacles in different elements, different countries, different actors. And it starts to introduce you to these new characters that later
Yeah.
on are going to pop up there.
Awesome. And speaking of introducing you, you've also done some nonfiction work as well, regarding cold cases.
It's no, they are fiction.
Oh, they're fiction. Oh, okay. I thought they were nonfiction. Okay.
Yeah, fiction. Yeah. Um, I had an idea, and unfortunately, I get these ideas, and then my wife gets a hold of them, and she goes, "No." Um,
She shoots you
but
down.
I had an idea, huh?
She shoots you down and says, "Uh-uh."
Uh, yeah, I had an idea for a character as kind of like a little bit of a because sometimes as a writer, when you're working on your primary book,
Hmm.
you kind of get these other ideas and they don't
Absolutely.
necessarily fit in to the story.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like introducing a little side character, but I figured, okay, well, I'm just going to do it in a more shortened, almost like a novella style, because you have this idea and you go, okay, well, I'll run with it with a new character. And then I ended up doing three cold case uh, novellas and then combine them into a book because people were like, "Well, I don't have an ebook reader." And I'm like, "Okay, well, hold on, because we'll get you a print copy."
Awesome. No, I love it. I love the creativity and kind of going, something like the novella is just once you start doing this, it just opens up so many creative opportunities for you, which really is a blessing. So
Right.
where are you going next? What's next on the release docket? What's coming our way?
Well, I just finished up Shadow Strike, which
Okay.
is it's like an origin story for the main character, James McGuire.
Okay.
Um, there'll be a little bit of a tease in there because that story kind of plays into the current world that he's in,
Hmm.
but it's a backstory from when he was a Navy SEAL. Um, and right now, I'm writing the next McGuire book, which is tentatively titled "Exposed King," and that's it. I actually thought during COVID that I was going to get a tremendous amount of writing done. I didn't. I guess I needed a break.
Yeah.
But the worst part is that I wrote because I don't know how you write. I have to write everything out. So before I start with, the first chapter in my book, start writing it, I actually have to do an entire uh, progression
Okay.
where I go chapter one, chapter two, chapter three, all the way through to the end.
So you have a full
And
outline.
it may be a sentence, it might be a paragraph,
Okay.
it could be a couple of pages. Whatever I'm feeling at that moment, this is my outline for the book.
Gotcha.
And so the book that I'm writing now, I actually wrote the progression back in during COVID.
Hmm.
And it's only gotten more timely as time's gone on. And so it's one of these books where I really need to get it out because the subject material of the book is very timely. But
Okay.
at the same, I'm trying not to force it just to play catch up. So I'm trying to take my time, and I'm hopefully going to try to get that out by the end of the year, God
Okay.
willing.
That's aggressive, but I
I've
like aggressive. So
I've got about a third of it done.
okay.
But like I said, the nice thing with the outline is that I know where I'm going
Right.
with it. So
No, that totally helps. I've got one more book coming out by the end of this year too, and I'm it's actually going to the editor in a couple. Well, as we film this, it's going to the editor tomorrow night. So I can finally be like, goodbye. Good. I did my part. I'm not because I can't change it after I pay an editor because I'm not going to screw up what the editor just fixed, and I paid them good money to
Right.
fix. So, well, my final
Yeah, you get
question.
the, okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
As I was saying, gonna say, you get the book, you publish on a Friday, and by Monday you start getting the calls when's the next book coming out?
I know.
And it's like, this is a 400 or 500 page book. Did you sleep? I mean, what happened? And no, the book's not coming out anytime soon. I'm trying here.
You can read a book in one day. You just can't write it in one day.
No, no.
Definitely not. So, well, speaking of books, I think you'd agree with me that life is like a book. You have a first page, you have a last page. Fortunately, none of us know how many pages are going to fill that book. But as a writer, Andrew, you get to write your last page. What would you want that last page to say?
He made it this far?
I like that.
Yeah, because sometimes I sit down and I think to myself, how the heck? I mean, I'm a little bit older than you. And sometimes I'm actually astounded that I've made it this far. It's like after everything that I've gone through, it's like, wow, I guess God's not ready for me yet. So it's like, yeah, just stay here for a little bit longer. Um, that's a very good question.
There's a lot of ways to take it.
And I think, yeah, I honestly, I wrote a book that was a nonfiction. It was called Where Was God?
Yes.
And it dealt with the question of where was God after in the aftermath of 9/11.
Hmm.
Um, and what I found as I was writing it, that I didn't have an answer. I mean, I'm a Christian,
Hmm.
but it was one of those things where I got asked so often,
Right.
and I didn't have an answer for it. And so as I sat down, one of the things that came to mind to me was I'm a Christian, I believe in God, but how can we ask the question, where was God, if we don't know if there is a God?
Hmm.
No, I mean, we can't ask. Theoretically you can, but you
Sure.
may not get an answer.
Right.
And so when I sat down to write this book, it actually became a cold case investigation
Wow.
to identify and to look at the case for Christ.
Hmm.
And so I think that book, and I, like I said, I've written a bunch of books, but that book to me was personal.
Hmm.
And I started, it took me about, I'd been about 5 years
Wow.
trying to write this book.
Well, I think that book probably then is something that people need to get their hands on, and then that almost I think is the answer of what would you want that last page to say. I bet you it's in that the pages of that book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Andrew, for coming on. Sorry for the technical glitches. Again, I wanted to get this in
No,
if we
thank you for
could.
having me on, Eric. I really appreciate it.
Um, where can our listeners go to find out more about you and to especially get a copy of your books?
Okay. You can go to andrewgnelson.org. That's my website. There's links there. It'll take you over to Twitter. My books are available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. I'm even told I'm in Walmart. So
Well, thank you for coming on. And listeners, go support Andrew and get a copy of his books. Thanks, Andrew.
thank you, Eric.